The emergency alarm screamed through the command center as Admiral Thyron watched another red dot vanish from the galactic map that made 17 colonies in the past month. The Devourers were moving faster than anyone had predicted, consuming entire worlds and converting the matter into more of themselves. "Sir, we've lost contact with the Meridian system," reported his communications officer. The young alien's blue skin had turned pale with fear. The automated probes confirmed total planetary consumption. Thyron's forearms crossed over his chest as he studied the tactical display. The biomechanical swarm had appeared from dark space. 6 months ago, emerging from the void between galaxies like a plague of metal locusts. Every weapon the Galactic Council possessed had proven useless against them. Energy shields were absorbed, kinetic weapons were converted into raw material, and their adaptive technology made each encounter more difficult than the last. "What about the Nexari battle fleet?" Theron asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Destroyed, sir. They managed to take out 3 Devourer units before being overwhelmed. The swarm consumed their ships and used the technology to create 12 new units." The Admiral's secondary hearts began racing. The Nexari were the most advanced military force in the galaxy, their weapons capable of cracking moons. If they couldn't stop the Devourers, nothing could. "Sir," the communications officer continued, "we're receiving surrender broadcasts from the Outer Rim colonies. They're requesting evacuation assistance." "With what ships?" Thyron snapped. "Half our fleet is space dust, and the other half is barely holding the line at the core worlds." The truth was becoming clear to everyone in the command center. The Galactic Council, which had maintained peace and order for 10,000 years, was facing extinction. The Devourers weren't just another hostile species they could negotiate with or defeat through superior technology. They were something entirely different, something that consumed civilizations and used their own strength against them. "Open a channel to all council members," Thyron ordered. "Emergency session, immediate priority." The holographic display flickered to life, showing the desperate faces of leaders from across the galaxy. The Altarian Chancellor's normally composed expression was cracked with stress. The Vorthan War Master's battle scars seemed deeper than usual. Even the ancient Christic collective, beings of pure energy, appeared dimmed by fear. "The situation is critical," Thyron began without preamble. "Our conventional forces have failed. The Devourers adapt to every strategy we employ. They're not just destroying us, they're learning from us." Chancellor Vex of the Altarians leaned forward. "What do you propose, Admiral?" "We've exhausted every military option. We need to think beyond military solutions," Thyron replied. "The Devourers operate on predictable patterns. They consume, analyze, and adapt. But what if we could find something truly unpredictable? Something that doesn't follow our established patterns of warfare?" The War Master's scarred face twisted into a snarl. "You're talking about chaos, Admiral. That's not strategy, that's madness." "Maybe madness is exactly what we need," Thyron sighed quietly. "I propose we send a distress signal to every inhabited system in the galaxy. Not just council members, but everyone. Even the primitive worlds on the Outer Rim." The Chancellor's eyes widened. "You can't be serious. Most of those species haven't even achieved faster-than-light travel." "That's exactly why we need them," Thyron insisted. "They haven't been shaped by our conventions. They might see solutions we can't." The debate continued for hours, but desperation ultimately won. The Council authorized a galaxy-wide distress beacon, a cry for help that would reach every known inhabited world. The message was simple and direct. Ancient enemy returns. Conventional weapons useless. Seek unconventional solutions. Compensation guaranteed. Dr. Rebecca Stone was reviewing spectral analysis data when the communication array detected the signal. The massive dish outside her laboratory had been monitoring space for unusual transmissions since humanity's first contact with the Altarians 5 years earlier. The relationship had been cordial but distant, with both species maintaining respectful boundaries. "Dr. Stone," her assistant called out, We're receiving a priority transmission from the Galactic Council. It's being broadcast on all frequencies. Rebecca hurried to the main console, her coffee growing cold as she listened to the translated message. The universal translator converted the alien words into English, but the desperation in the original speaker's voice needed no translation. Ancient enemy returns. Conventional weapons useless. Seek unconventional solutions. Compensation guaranteed. The message repeated several times before cutting to static. Rebecca stared at the screen, her mind racing. The Galactic Council was asking for help, which meant they were facing something beyond their considerable capabilities. Route this to Global Defense Initiative immediately, she ordered. Priority Alpha classification. Within hours, the message had reached every major government on Earth. The response was swift and unanimous. Humanity would help. The reasons varied from person to person, some driven by genuine altruism, others by curiosity about galactic technology, and a few by the simple human instinct to punch back when someone was being bullied. General Marcus Webb coordinated the response from his underground command center. The gruff military leader had been skeptical about alien contact from the beginning, but he understood the implications of a galactic threat. If something could overwhelm the advanced civilizations of the Council, it would eventually reach Earth. What do we know about this ancient enemy? He asked his intelligence team. Very little, sir, came the reply. The Altarians have been tight-lipped about their military capabilities, but if they're asking for help, it must be something extraordinary. Webb nodded grimly. Send our response. Tell them we'll help. Give us 2 weeks to prepare. The human response reached the Council Command Center just as another system fell to the Devourers. Admiral Theron read the message with growing bewilderment. Earth, a world barely capable of interstellar travel, was offering assistance against a threat that had consumed dozens of advanced civilizations. 2 weeks? The Chancellor said when informed. What could they possibly accomplish in 2 weeks? Perhaps they don't understand the scope of the threat, suggested the War Master. Their primitive sensors might not detect the true scale of the Devourer swarm. Theron wasn't so sure. The humans had surprised everyone during first contact by demonstrating technologies that shouldn't have been possible at their development level. They approached problems from angles that made no sense to established galactic thinking. Let them try, he decided. At this point, we have nothing to lose. The Admiral didn't realize how wrong he was about having nothing to lose. In 2 weeks, humanity would arrive at the besieged Altarian homeworld, and the galaxy would discover that sometimes the most dangerous response to a call for help comes from those who take the request seriously. As the communication ended, Theron returned to watching the tactical display. Another red dot vanished from the map, and the Devourers moved closer to the core worlds. He had no way of knowing that his desperate gamble had just set in motion events that would save the galaxy, while simultaneously making every advanced civilization question their understanding of intelligence, warfare, and the very nature of civilization itself. The call for help had gone to Earth, and regret would follow quickly. The factory floor buzzed with activity as workers loaded the strangest cargo ever assembled for a military mission. Dr. Rebecca Stone watched from the observation deck as crates of musical instruments were stacked next to cases of spray paint, while nearby teams secured pallets of recreational equipment that belonged more in a circus than a spaceship. Are you absolutely certain about this? General Webb asked, standing beside her with his arms crossed. His weathered face showed the strain of the past 2 weeks, during which he'd coordinated the most unusual military preparation in human history. The Devourer fragments don't lie, Rebecca replied, holding up a tablet displaying her analysis. Their biomechanical structure operates on pure logic patterns. They consume, analyze, and adapt based on predictable behavior. But look at this neural network mapping. She swiped through several screens showing complex diagrams that resembled circuit boards more than organic tissue. Every decision tree follows mathematical probability. They expect resistance to be organized, systematic, and rational. They've never encountered anything truly random. Webb shook his head as he watched a group of musicians tuning their instruments near a pile of extreme sports equipment. "This isn't random, Rebecca. This is insanity." "Maybe that's exactly what we need," she said with a smile. "When was the last time humanity did anything the conventional way?" Below them, Captain Torres supervised the loading of what appeared to be party supplies mixed with scientific equipment. The veteran officer had initially questioned the mission parameters, but 20 years of military service had taught her to trust unusual strategies when conventional ones failed. "Load the audio equipment in Bay 7, she called out to her team, "and make sure those amplifiers are properly secured. We're going to need maximum volume." A technician approached with a manifest. "Captain, we've got the volunteer roster finalized. 237 individuals from 53 different countries." Torres scanned the list with growing amazement. "Professional athletes, street performers, stand-up comedians, rock musicians, abstract artists, and what the military classified as creative unconventionals." The roster read like a festival lineup rather than a military unit. "Any military experience among them?" she asked. "About 30% have some form of combat training," the technician replied. "The rest are pure civilians." The selection committee prioritized creativity over conventional skills. That selection committee had been unlike anything in military history. Instead of evaluating marksmanship and tactical knowledge, they tested candidates on their ability to think outside established parameters. The questions had been deliberately absurd. How would you defeat an enemy using only children's toys? What's the most illogical solution to a logical problem? Can you make someone laugh while they're trying to kill you? The results had been remarkable. Traditional soldiers had struggled with the abstract concepts, while artists, entertainers, and free-thinking civilians had excelled. The final team included a professional wrestler who'd never held a weapon, a violinist who'd never left Earth's atmosphere, and a chef whose only combat experience came from kitchen disasters. "Dr. Stone," came a voice from behind them. Michael Xiang, the mission's appointed chaos coordinator, approached with paint-stained hands and a grin that suggested he'd enjoyed his preparation work. "We finished the visual disruption protocols. 40 different color combinations, all designed to create maximum sensory confusion." "Perfect," Rebecca replied. "How's the audio team progressing?" "Aina has been working with the sound engineers," Michael said, referring to the violinist who'd become the mission's musical director. "They've created frequency combinations that should overload any logical processing system. Death metal mixed with classical electronic beats layered with traditional folk music. It's absolutely horrible." "Good," General Webb muttered. "If it bothers us, it should terrify them." The truth was that the human preparation hadn't followed any recognizable military doctrine. Instead of studying enemy tactics and developing counter-strategies, they'd focused on creating maximum unpredictability. The mission plan, if it could be called that, was intentionally chaotic. Lieutenant Commander Riley had been placed in charge of the audio assault team. His background in military communications had been deemed less important than his weekend hobby of DJing at underground music venues. "We're not trying to communicate with them," he'd explained to his bewildered superiors. "We're trying to break their ability to communicate with each other." The medical team had been equally unconventional. Dr. Martinez, a psychiatrist who specialized in treating combat stress, had been assigned to monitor the psychological effects of chaos on organized minds. "The devourers think in patterns," she'd explained. "When those patterns break down, they'll experience something equivalent to a mental breakdown." "That's assuming they have minds as we understand them," Rebecca had replied. "Everything has a mind of some kind," Martinez had countered. "The question is whether we can drive it insane." The weapon systems reflected humanity's backwards approach to the problem. Instead of developing new energy weapons or kinetic bombardment systems, they'd focused on delivery methods for their unconventional arsenal. Paint launchers, sound cannons, and what the engineers had dubbed chaos bombs filled the armory. Thunder Johnson, the professional wrestler who'd volunteered for the mission, was practicing his technique on modified training dummies. His approach to combat involved no weapons at all, just physical strength combined with psychological warfare through incomprehensible battle cries and deliberate absurdity. The key is to make them question reality, he explained to anyone who'd listen. When your enemy doesn't understand what you're doing, they can't adapt to it. The command structure itself had been deliberately flattened. Instead of a rigid hierarchy, the human force operated more like a creative collective. Ideas flowed freely between ranks, and the best suggestions were implemented regardless of who proposed them. Captain Torres had initially resisted this approach, but she'd come to appreciate its advantages. Traditional military structure assumes you know what you're fighting, she'd told her officers. We have no idea what we're up against, so we need to be ready for anything. The final equipment manifest would have confused any military analyst. Alongside standard spacesuits and life support systems, they'd packed musical instruments, art supplies, recreational drugs for creative enhancement, alcohol for social lubrication, and sporting equipment for kinetic expression. Is that really necessary? Webb had asked when he'd seen the alcohol allocation. General, Rebecca had replied, we're asking people to face an unknown alien threat using methods that violate every principle of warfare. If they want a drink before battle, I say let them have it. The volunteers themselves had adapted to the unusual preparation with remarkable enthusiasm. The musicians had formed impromptu bands, the artists had covered every available surface with bizarre murals, and the athletes had invented new sports using alien environment simulations. They're not preparing for war, observed Dr. Martinez, during one of her psychological evaluations. They're preparing for the world's most dangerous performance art piece. As the 2-week deadline approached, the human fleet began final preparations. The ships themselves were standard military vessels, but their contents would have horrified any traditional military commander. Instead of organized efficiency, they radiated controlled chaos. The Galactic Council had been monitoring human preparations with growing confusion. Their surveillance reported military vessels being loaded with entertainment equipment, civilian volunteers undergoing training that resembled party planning more than combat preparation, and communication intercepts that suggested the humans were planning some form of cultural exchange rather than warfare. Perhaps they don't understand the nature of the threat, Admiral Firen had suggested during one briefing. Or perhaps they understand something we don't, replied the Chancellor. Though he couldn't imagine what that might be. As the human fleet prepared to depart, Rebecca stood on the observation deck one final time. The volunteers were boarding their ships, carrying instruments, art supplies, and attitudes that defied conventional military bearing. They looked more like a traveling festival than a military force. Second thoughts? General Webb asked, joining her. No, she replied firmly. We've spent our entire history surviving through adaptation and creativity. If the Devourers think in patterns, we'll show them what chaos looks like. The human fleet launched on schedule, carrying its cargo of controlled madness toward the besieged Altarian homeworld. Behind them, Earth's leaders watched with mixture of pride and terror, knowing they'd just sent their most creative citizens to face an enemy that had consumed dozens of advanced civilizations. The call for help had gone to Earth, and humanity's response was about to teach the galaxy that sometimes the most dangerous weapon is the complete absence of a coherent plan. The Altarian homeworld burned beneath a sky filled with metallic death. Admiral Farron watched from his command vessel as the Devourer swarm descended like a plague of mechanical locusts, their biomechanical forms shifting and adapting as they consumed everything in their path. The planet's once beautiful crystal cities were being systematically converted into raw material for the ever-growing swarm. Sir, we're detecting incoming vessels, reported his tactical officer. Human signatures. Approaching from Vector 77 Alpha. Thyron felt a mixture of relief and despair. The humans had come as promised, but what could their tiny fleet possibly accomplish against a threat that had overwhelmed the combined forces of the Galactic Council? Their ships were primitive by galactic standards, barely capable of faster-than-light travel. How many vessels? He asked. 12 ships, sir. Small cruiser class, no apparent weapon signatures matching our databases. That was puzzling. The humans were approaching an active war zone without detectable armaments. Either they were incredibly brave or completely insane. Given what Theron knew about human behavior, both options seemed equally likely. Open a communication channel, he ordered. Let's see what they have planned. The main screen flickered to life, showing the face of a human female wearing what appeared to be a standard military uniform. Her expression was calm, almost cheerful, which seemed completely inappropriate given the circumstances. Admiral Theron, the human said. This is Captain Torres of the Human Expeditionary Force. We're here to help with your devourer problem. Captain? Torres? Theron replied carefully. I appreciate your species' willingness to assist, but I must warn you that this enemy is unlike anything we've encountered. They adapt to every weapon system, absorb energy attacks, and convert kinetic weapons into additional units. Torres smiled, an expression that somehow made Theron more nervous than reassured. Admiral, with respect, I don't think you understand what we're bringing to this fight. We're not here to destroy the Devourers, we're here to confuse them. Before Theron could respond, the human fleet began deploying in a pattern that violated every principle of tactical formation. Instead of maintaining defensive positions or coordinating attack vectors, they scattered seemingly at random, with some ships diving toward the planet while others positioned themselves in what appeared to be completely arbitrary locations. What are they doing? Asked his tactical officer. I have no idea, Theron admitted, which was becoming an increasingly common response when dealing with humans. The first indication that something unusual was happening came from the communications array. Lieutenant Commander Riley had positioned his ship directly between the main Devourer swarm and the planet's surface. And suddenly the electromagnetic spectrum exploded with noise, but this wasn't the clean, organized communication jamming that military forces typically employed. This was chaos in audio form, a devastating mixture of human music styles that should never have been combined. Death metal guitar riffs clashed with classical violin, electronic beats collided with traditional folk songs, and underneath it all, the deep bass rumble of what humans called dubstep. The effect on the Devourer swarm was immediate and catastrophic. Their biomechanical forms, which had been moving in perfect coordination, suddenly began to stagger and weave like drunken dancers. The hive mind that controlled them was trying to process the audio input, but human music operated on emotional and cultural patterns that had no logical foundation. Their formation is breaking apart, reported the tactical officer, wonder creeping into his voice. They're losing coordination. That's impossible, Theron breathed. They adapt to everything. Not to this, apparently, came a new voice over the communication channel. Michael Chung had apparently taken over the transmission. And behind him, Theron could see what appeared to be a human art studio rather than a military bridge. The thing about adaptation, Michael continued while mixing what appeared to be paint, is that it requires understanding the underlying patterns, but art doesn't have underlying patterns. It's expression without logic, and logic can't adapt to something that doesn't make sense. As if to demonstrate his point, Michael launched a salvo of paint bombs from his ship. The projectiles weren't designed to cause damage, but to create visual chaos. Brilliant colors exploded across the dark hulls of the Devourer vessels, creating patterns that served no tactical purpose whatsoever. The biomechanical creatures began to malfunction even more severely. Their adaptive systems were trying to analyze the paint patterns for strategic significance, but there was none. The colors were random, the shapes were arbitrary, and the overall effect was to create something that looked like a kindergarten art project spread across an alien invasion. Force. This is insane, Theron muttered, but he couldn't argue with the results. The Devourer swarm was disintegrating into individual units, each one struggling to process inputs that made no logical sense. The situation became even more surreal when Thunder, Johnson's transport ship, opened its cargo bay and the professional wrestler launched himself directly at a Devourer unit. He wasn't wearing power armor or carrying advanced weapons. He was dressed in colorful wrestling attire and screaming incomprehensible battle cries. "Taste the thunder of justice, metal breath!" He roared while grappling with a biomechanical creature 10 times his size. The Devourer unit's response was almost comedic. It tried to analyze Johnson's attack pattern, but there was no pattern to analyze. The human was fighting based on entertainment value rather than tactical effectiveness, and the creature's advanced combat algorithms had no framework for processing such behavior. "He's actually winning," the tactical officer reported in disbelief. "The Devourer unit is retreating from a single unarmed human." But the real breakthrough came when Anna Petrov began her violin performance. The musician had positioned herself on the hull of her ship, protected only by a spacesuit and her absolute confidence in the power of music. Her violin sang through the vacuum of space, transmitted through the ship's communication systems directly into the Devourer network. The piece she played was improvised, a haunting melody that seemed to capture something essential about the human experience. It spoke of loss and hope, of struggle and beauty, of the strange contradiction that defined human existence. The Devourers, creatures of pure logic and efficiency, encountered something they had never experienced before. Art that existed solely to be beautiful. The effect was devastating. The biomechanical creatures began to shut down, not from damage, but from something that could only be described as existential confusion. Their collective consciousness was trying to process the concept of beauty, but beauty had no survival value, no logical purpose, no reason to exist except that it made life worth living. "They're stopping," reported the tactical officer. "The entire swarm is just ... stopping." Theron stared at the tactical display as thousands of Devourer units simply hung motionless in space, their biomechanical forms twitching as they struggled to process concepts that existed outside their understanding of reality. "Captain Torres," he said into the communication channel, "what exactly are you doing to them?" "We're being human," Torres replied simply. "We're showing them what it means to exist without purpose, to create without reason, to fight without logic. They're machines that think like us, but they've never encountered anything that thinks like them but acts like us." The final phase of the battle, if it could be called that, involved the entire human force working in concert to create what could only be described as organized chaos. Musicians played discordant symphonies. Artists painted meaningless murals on enemy hulls. Athletes performed impossible stunts in zero gravity. And comedians broadcast jokes that translated poorly but somehow still conveyed the essential absurdity of human existence. The Devourer swarm, faced with an enemy that operated outside every logical framework, began to retreat. Their biomechanical forms, designed to consume and convert organized matter, simply couldn't process the concept of organized chaos. They had encountered something that was simultaneously intelligent and completely irrational, and their adaptive systems couldn't cope with the contradiction. "They're withdrawing," reported the tactical officer. "The entire swarm is retreating to the outer system." "Retreating from what?" Theron asked. "They outnumber the humans 1,000 to 1. "They're retreating from confusion," Dr. Martinez explained, her voice coming through the communication channel. "We've given them the psychological equivalent of a nervous breakdown. They can't fight something they can't understand, and they can't understand something that doesn't make sense." As the human fleet regrouped around the damaged Altarian homeworld, Theron found himself staring at his sensor readings in complete bewilderment. The most advanced military force in the galaxy had been defeated by a collection of humans who were treating interstellar warfare like a street performance. "Admiral," Torres said, her voice carrying a note of satisfaction, "this is just the beginning. We need to get to their main fleet before they figure out how to adapt to chaos." Theron realized with growing horror that the humans weren't finished. They had turned the Devourer swarm's greatest strength, their adaptive intelligence, into a crippling weakness. But they had also demonstrated something far more disturbing. They had shown that conventional military thinking was meaningless when faced with beings who operated outside all known parameters. The call for help had gone to Earth, and the humans had responded with something that would haunt the galaxies. understanding of warfare forever. They had proven that sometimes the most effective weapon wasn't superior technology or tactical brilliance, but the simple willingness to be completely, utterly, and proudly insane. As the human fleet prepared to pursue the retreating devourers, Firing realized that his species had made a terrible mistake. They had asked for help from beings who defined themselves by their refusal to follow any sensible rules, and now those beings were loose in the galaxy with proven methods for defeating any logical opponent. The regret was beginning to set in. The Devourer mothership stretched across space like a metallic nightmare, its biomechanical surface pulsing with the absorbed essence of dozens of consumed worlds. Dr. Rebecca Stone studied the massive entity from her observation post, watching as smaller Devourer units swarmed around it in perfect geometric patterns. "It's beautiful in a terrifying way," she murmured into her communication device, "like a chrome cancer that's achieved consciousness." "Beauty won't help us if it eats the galaxy," replied Captain Torres from the command vessel. The human fleet had pursued the retreating Devourers to this staging area at the edge of Altarian space, where the enemy had gathered around their central intelligence. The mothership was larger than most planets, its surface covered with processing facilities that converted consumed matter into new Devourer units. According to the Galactic Council's intelligence, this was the source of the entire swarm, the central consciousness that coordinated the biomechanical plague. "Any ideas on how to confuse something that big?" Torres asked her team. "Same principles as before," Dr. Martinez replied from her psychology station. "But we need to scale up the chaos. That thing processes information on a galactic level, so we need to hit it with something equally massive." The human fleet had been reinforced by volunteers from Earth, bringing their total force to nearly 1,000 individuals. But even with increased numbers, they were facing an enemy that could consume star systems. The Devourer mothership alone outmassed their entire fleet by several million tons. "Lieutenant Commander Riley," Torres called out, "are your audio systems ready for planetary-scale broadcasting?" "Affirmative, Captain," came the reply. "We've linked every ship's communication array into a single network. When we broadcast, the entire system will hear us." "Good. Michael, how's the visual arts team?" "Ready to paint the void," Michael Chung responded with characteristic enthusiasm. "We've got enough color bombs to redecorate a small moon." The plan, if it could be called that, was to assault the mothership with the same chaotic methods that had worked against the smaller swarms. But the scale required coordination that seemed to contradict humanity's embrace of randomness. "The trick," explained Dr. Stone to the assembled team leaders, "is organized chaos. We need to be unpredictable, but we need to be unpredictable together." "That makes no sense," observed Aina Petrov, the violinist who had become the mission's unofficial philosopher. "Exactly," Stone replied with a smile. "If it made sense, they could adapt to it." The attack began with Riley's audio assault, but this time the cacophony was amplified through every human ship simultaneously. The result was a wall of sound that defied description, a mixture of every musical style humanity had ever developed played at maximum volume through space itself. The mothership's reaction was immediate and alarming. Its biomechanical surface began to ripple like liquid metal, and the geometric patterns of the surrounding swarm dissolved into chaos. The central intelligence was trying to process the audio input, but human music operated on emotional frequencies that had no logical foundation. "It's working," reported the tactical officer aboard the Altarian command vessel. Admiral Theron watched in fascination as the most advanced enemy in galactic history struggled with something as simple as noise. "Simple?" Torres laughed when she heard his assessment. "Admiral, what we're broadcasting isn't simple. It's the distilled essence of human cultural expression. Jazz improvisation, punk rock rebellion, classical complexity, electronic innovation, and folk tradition all mixed together. It's 10,000 years of human creativity compressed into pure audio chaos." The visual assault came next. Michael Chang's art team launched their color bombs with the precision of a military strike, but the payloads were designed to create beauty rather than destruction. Brilliant explosions of paint covered the mothership's hull, creating patterns that served no purpose except to exist, but this wasn't random graffiti. The human artists had coordinated their efforts to create something unprecedented. A collaborative artwork spanning millions of square kilometers, painted on the hull of an enemy vessel during active combat. The result was a masterpiece that told the story of humanity's chaotic journey through space. "They're painting our history," Dr. Stone realized as she watched the colors spread across the mothership's surface. Every major cultural movement, every artistic breakthrough, every moment of human creativity is being represented. The mothership's response was increasingly erratic. Its biomechanical processes were attempting to analyze the artistic patterns for strategic significance, but there was none. The artwork existed solely to be beautiful, and beauty had no survival value in the Devourer's logical framework. Thunder. Johnson's wrestling team had been modified for the larger scale of the battle. Instead of individual combat, they were performing synchronized routines that looked like a combination of martial arts and interpretive dance. Their movements were broadcast directly to the mothership's consciousness, creating a kinetic poetry that operated outside all known parameters of combat. Witness the fury of coordinated randomness. Johnson bellowed as his team executed a move that was simultaneously a military maneuver and a performance art piece. The mothership's surface began to crack. Not from physical damage, but from something that could only be described as confusion. Overload. The Central Intelligence was trying to process multiple streams of contradictory information, each one more illogical than the last. Anna Petrov's violin performance had evolved into something transcendent. Playing from the observation deck of her ship, she had begun improvising a symphony that incorporated the sounds of the battle itself. The screech of metal, the hum of engines, the chaos of human voices, all woven together into something that was both terrible and beautiful. "She's composing the battle," Dr. Martinez observed with wonder. "She's turning warfare into music." The effect on the mothership was catastrophic. The biomechanical entity began broadcasting what could only be described as electronic screams, digital expressions of something approaching panic. It had encountered something that challenged its fundamental understanding of existence. But the real breakthrough came when comedian Dave Martinez began his stand-up routine. Broadcasting directly to the mothership's consciousness, he delivered jokes that were simultaneously hilarious and deeply philosophical. His material dealt with the absurdity of existence, the meaninglessness of purpose, and the strange joy that humans found in acknowledging their own insignificance. "So there's this biomechanical swarm that's conquering the galaxy," Martinez said, his timing perfect despite the circumstances. "And they're doing it because they think consumption equals purpose. That they've never met humans who consume pizza at 3 in the morning and call it a life choice." The mothership's response was unprecedented. Its biomechanical systems began to shut down, not from damage but from something that could only be described as existential crisis. The Central Intelligence was trying to process the concept of humor, but humor required an understanding of irony, and irony was antithetical to logical systems. "They're laughing," Dr. Stone realized with amazement, "or trying to. The mothership is attempting to understand jokes, and it's breaking their cognitive processes." The final phase of the battle involved the entire human force working in perfect chaotic harmony. Musicians played impossible symphonies, artists painted meaningless masterpieces, athletes performed beautiful stunts, comedians delivered profound absurdities, and warriors fought with glorious inefficiency. The mothership, faced with an enemy that operated outside every known parameter of existence, began to retreat. But this wasn't a tactical withdrawal. The biomechanical entity was fleeing from something that challenged its fundamental understanding of reality. "They're not just retreating," reported the tactical officer. "They're broadcasting what appears to be a surrender signal." "Surrender?" Admiral Theron asked in disbelief. "They're offering to surrender?" "Not to us," Torres replied with a grin. "To the concept of chaos itself. They've realized that there are forms of intelligence that can't be conquered because they can't be understood. The mothership's final transmission was a mixture of electronic despair and something approaching respect. The Central Intelligence had encountered something that was simultaneously more and less advanced than itself, and it couldn't reconcile the contradiction. "They're asking for safe passage out of the galaxy," Dr. Stone translated. "They want to leave and never come back, and we're going to let them?" Admiral Theron asked. "Of course," Torres replied. "We never wanted to destroy them. We just wanted them to understand that there are some things in the universe that are too beautiful to consume." As the Devourer mothership began its retreat to the edge of the galaxy, the human fleet regrouped around the liberated Altarian homeworld. The biomechanical swarm that had terrorized dozens of civilizations was fleeing from something as simple as human creativity. "What exactly did we just witness?" Admiral Theron asked during the post-battle briefing. "You witnessed the weaponization of chaos," Dr. Stone replied. "We showed them that intelligence doesn't always follow logical patterns, that consciousness can exist without purpose, and that sometimes the most effective strategy is to have no strategy at all." The human fleet began preparations for their return to Earth, leaving behind a galaxy that would never again underestimate the power of organized randomness. They had proven that sometimes the most advanced weapon isn't superior technology or tactical brilliance, but the simple willingness to embrace the beautiful absurdity of existence. The call for help had gone to Earth, and humanity had responded with something that would forever change the galaxy's understanding of warfare, intelligence, and the very nature of consciousness itself. They had turned chaos into art, and art into victory. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in the pristine chambers of the Altarian capital, but the atmosphere was anything but celebratory. Admiral Theron stood before the assembled leaders, his forearms crossed in a gesture that conveyed both relief and deep concern. "The Devourer threat has been eliminated," he announced, though his tone suggested this wasn't entirely good news. "The biomechanical swarm has retreated beyond the galactic rim and shows no signs of returning." Chancellor Vex leaned forward in his crystalline chair. "That should be cause for celebration, Admiral. Why do you sound troubled?" "Because of how it was accomplished," Thyron replied, activating a holographic display that showed footage from the recent battle. "The humans didn't defeat the Devourers through superior firepower or tactical brilliance. They confused them into submission using methods that violate every principle of civilized warfare." The assembled leaders watched in growing unease as the recordings played. They saw humans painting enemy vessels during combat, musicians treating interstellar warfare like a concert, and warriors who fought based on entertainment value rather than strategic effectiveness. "This is madness," declared the Vorthan War Master, his scarred face twisted with disgust. "They turned a battle into a performance, and it worked," Admiral Thyron replied grimly. "That's the problem. They've proven that our understanding of warfare, intelligence, and civilization itself is incomplete. They've shown us that chaos can be more effective than order." The debate that followed was heated and prolonged. Some council members argued for immediately integrating human methods into galactic defense protocols. Others insisted that such tactics were too dangerous to be allowed to spread. A few suggested that humanity itself might pose a greater long-term threat than the Devourers ever had. "At least we could predict the Devourers," observed the Christic Collective representative, its energy form flickering with anxiety. "They followed logical patterns. But humans operate outside any framework we understand." The discussion was interrupted by an incoming transmission from the human fleet. Captain Torres appeared on the main screen, her expression calm and professional, despite the chaos visible in the background of her ship. "Council members," she said with a slight smile, "we've completed our mission and are preparing to return to Earth. We wanted to thank you for the opportunity to help." Chancellor Vex cleared his throat nervously. "Captain Torres, on behalf of the Galactic Council, we express our gratitude for your assistance. As promised, we are prepared to offer substantial compensation for your services." "That's very generous," Torres replied, "but we don't want your technology, your resources, or your territory. We want something much simpler." What do you require? The Chancellor asked, though he was beginning to suspect the answer wouldn't be simple at all. We want to be left alone, Torres said firmly. We want to continue developing our own culture, our own technology, and our own understanding of the universe without interference from galactic civilization. The council members exchanged glances. This was unexpected. Most species sought integration with galactic society, eager to benefit from advanced technology and interstellar trade. Are you certain? Admiral Thyron asked. We could offer you worlds. Technologies that would advance your civilization by thousands of years? Admiral, Torres replied patiently, the reason we could defeat the Devourers is precisely because we developed outside your influence. If we adopt your methods, your technology, your way of thinking, we'll lose the very qualities that made us effective. Dr. Stone appeared beside Torres on the screen. The Council asked for unconventional solutions because conventional methods had failed. But conventional methods failed because they were conventional. The moment we become conventional, we lose our greatest advantage. The truth of this statement was uncomfortable for everyone present. The humans had succeeded precisely because they operated outside galactic norms. But those same qualities that made them effective allies also made them potentially dangerous neighbors. What guarantees do we have, asked the War Master, that your species won't turn these methods against us? None, Torres replied honestly. But you have the same guarantee we have that you won't turn your advanced weapons against us. We'll all just have to trust each other. The transmission ended, leaving the Council in uncomfortable silence. The humans had saved the galaxy and asked for nothing in return except isolation. It was a reasonable request, but it also meant that a species capable of defeating logic itself would be developing in complete independence. We need to discuss this privately, Chancellor Vex announced. The closed session that followed was unlike any in Council history. Instead of debating trade agreements or territorial disputes, they were discussing how to contain a species that had proven itself capable of weaponizing chaos itself. They're not aggressive, Admiral Thyron pointed out. They could have demanded tribute, territory, or technological exchange. Instead, they're asking to be left alone. For now, the War Master replied darkly. But what happens when they decide? Isolation is no longer in their interest? What happens when they want to expand? Then we'll face the same problem the Devourers did, observed the Christic Collective. How do you fight an enemy that operates outside all known parameters? The debate continued for hours, but the conclusion was inevitable. The Council couldn't force humanity to integrate with galactic civilization, and they couldn't risk antagonizing a species that had proven capable of defeating any logical opponent. We'll establish a quarantine zone around the Earth system, Chancellor Vex announced. Officially, it's for humanity's protection during their continued development. Unofficially, it's to contain them. And if they try to leave the zone? Asked the War Master. We'll hope they don't, Admiral Thyron replied grimly. The quarantine protocols were established within days. Warning beacons were placed at the edge of the Sol system, broadcasting a message that would become legend throughout the galaxy. Dangerous species. Unpredictable behavior. Approach with extreme caution. The official Council records described the quarantine as a protective measure, but the classified files told a different story. Humanity had been contained not because they were primitive, but because they were too advanced in ways that galactic civilization couldn't understand or predict. Captain Torres received the quarantine notification during her fleet's return journey. To Earth, she read the message with amusement rather than anger. They're afraid of us, she told her crew. They've realized that we're not just different, we're incomprehensible. Should we be offended? Asked Dr. Stone. No, Torres replied. We should be proud. We've achieved something no other species in galactic history has managed. We've made the entire galaxy nervous by simply being ourselves. The human fleet's return to Earth was celebrated as a triumph, but the celebration was muted by the realization of what they'd accomplished. They hadn't just defeated an alien threat, they'd demonstrated that human nature itself was a weapon of unprecedented power. General Webb debriefed the returning volunteers in a secure facility, listening to their accounts with growing amazement. The musicians described battles fought with symphonies. The artists talked about painting their way to victory. And the athletes explained how they defeated advanced technology through sheer physical absurdity. "We didn't change the way we fight. Thunder," Johnson explained. "We made fighting change to accommodate us." The implications were staggering. Humanity had proven that their greatest weakness, their inability to follow logical patterns, was actually their greatest strength. They had weaponized chaos itself and used it to defeat an enemy that had consumed dozens of advanced civilizations. But the victory came with a price. The quarantine meant that humanity would develop in isolation, cut off from the vast technological and cultural resources of galactic civilization. They would have to continue advancing on their own, using their own methods and their own understanding of the universe. "Maybe that's for the best," Dr. Stone mused during one of the debriefing sessions. "We've proven that our way of thinking is effective, but we've also proven that it's dangerous. The galaxy might be safer with us contained." The final reports filed by the mission participants painted a picture of humanity that was both inspiring and terrifying. They had saved the galaxy not through superior technology or tactical brilliance, but through the simple act of being themselves. They had turned their greatest weakness into their greatest strength and proven that sometimes the most effective strategy is to have no strategy at all. As the months passed, reports began filtering in from across the galaxy. The human fleet had become legend, spoken of in hushed tones as the Chaos Bringers from the Third Rock. Their methods had been studied, analyzed, and ultimately dismissed as unreplicable by any sane species. Earth-style became a term used throughout the galaxy to describe any strategy based on controlled insanity. It was simultaneously admired and feared, respected and avoided. The Devourers, meanwhile, were last reported fleeing toward the neighboring galaxy, their biomechanical forms still processing the philosophical implications of their encounter with humanity. They had learned that there were forms of intelligence that couldn't be conquered because they couldn't be understood. Captain Torres filed her final mission report from her office on Earth, looking out at a blue sky that seemed somehow more precious now that she knew how rare their type of chaotic beauty was in the universe. "Mission accomplished," she wrote. "Alien threat neutralized. Galactic civilization preserved. Recommend we continue being ourselves, as apparently that's our greatest weapon." The report concluded with a note that would be filed in the deepest archives of human military history. The call for help went to Earth, and we responded in the most human way possible. We turned chaos into art, art into victory, and victory into a lesson that the galaxy will never forget. They asked for unconventional solutions, and we gave them something unconventional, ourselves. The regret that followed wasn't humanity's. It belonged to the galaxy that had learned too late that sometimes the most dangerous response to a call for help comes from those who take the request seriously and respond with everything they have, including their fundamental inability to do anything the way it's supposed to be done. Earth remained quarantined, but humanity remained free to be exactly what they had always been: beautifully, dangerously, and proudly unpredictable.